All right. Hello.
Hello. Look, Mom, I'm a movie star.
If you don't start it that way.
Oh, that's exactly how we're starting it. You're bringing heaven. Well, welcome everyone to Featuring Fatherhood. We talk all things safe, family, and fatherhood related. Still not back home. If you watched the last episode with my brother, we are still in Great Smoky Mountains. This is my dad, so he's joining me. I was like, how many episodes can I pack into one vacation trip? Gonna see if I can get Mom on one. Tried to get Emma and Selena into one, but yeah. So this is my dad, Rick Zeno. How'd you like those questions, by the way, from a couple episodes ago?
They were pretty good.
Yeah?
Yeah. It was interesting listening to them being written,
Like read back?
Read back, yeah.
Yeah. If you didn't catch that episode, you can go watch it, but basically someone just dropped something. Josiah and I asked each other's dads a bunch of questions, and they had to write answers back, and we read them to each other, so that was fun. But thought we would talk today, and we were like, what are we going to talk about? I thought we could talk about like StoryWorth and what we've been doing with that, and just trying to like tell your stories to the generations that follow. So,
First of all, do they know what StoryWorth is?
I was just about to say that. Do you want to explain that?
Okay,
No, please do. I'm actually interested to see how you would explain that.
Well, StoryWorth is a program that you can purchase, and Zachary did purchase it for me for Father's Day last year.
Yep.
And my mother has always said that from the time I began being a ranger, park ranger, that I should write down and record all those things that happened to me. Weird, stupid, scary, whatever.
Yeah.
And of course, I retired 37 years and hadn't done it yet. So since I was retired and supposedly didn't have anything to do, I started thinking about writing some of that stuff down. So then for Father's Day, Zachary purchased me this program, which it's for a year.
Yep.
And every week, Zachary actually poses these questions, comes up
Well,
with
I
these
started
questions.
to,
He
but
started
I-
to, yes. We have stopped to like week 7.
Yeah.
But ask the question, so what was my first park visit or
Yeah.
things like that. And you get a week to supposedly write it out. And then next week comes another question, and you get 52 questions supposedly because it's for 52 weeks. And then you get some time to edit and things like that. And
Add
then
photos.
it produces a part of the program that you pay for is it produces a book.
That was a really good description.
So where are we? Well, we officially only have 7 questions.
This, by the way, this was given last Father's Day.
Yes.
Not this Father's Day.
So actually, we just got the message that reminded us that our year is up.
And we'll probably need to subscribe again.
Subscribe
to
for
finish it up.
right.
Which is fine. So, I guess I should back up a little bit. We'll come back to StoryWorth, which, by the way, this isn't sponsored by StoryWorth at all, but we're talking about it, so whatever.
Maybe we can get a couple weeks out of it.
I know, right? Or another copy of your book. That'd be cool. So back up a little bit before we talk about StoryWorth. So my dad was a park ranger for 37 years with the National Park Service. You did stuff at Teddy Roosevelt National, which wasn't a national park when you were there.
There's a national memorial,
Yeah. Perry's Victory, which is at
which is on Lake Erie, South Bass Island, Lake Erie, and it commemorates the War of 1812, naval victory.
Yep, and that's not a monument.
It's an international peace memorial and memorial.
Okay. And then where else?
I was at Jamestown Island,
Yep,
which is
yep.
part of Colonial National Historical Park in
And
Virginia.
that was right after you and Mom were married.
Correct.
Which my mom was also a park ranger. She eventually transferred to the Army Corps of Engineers.
Correct.
But like I said in the episode with Eric, I'm the only one who has not been a part of the National Park Service.
Yep.
It's a bummer. But and then you spent the majority of your career at the Gateway Arch.
Gateway Arch, right?
Which was a monument and now is a national
National Memorial now has since been changed as a national park.
Yeah.
And I did 2 summers with the Corps of Engineers in New England, and
Yeah.
I did a year and a half, almost 2 years with the Bureau of Reclamation.
Yeah.
All those were park ranger positions too. So.
And if you can't tell by his accent, he grew up in Boston.
Well, I grew
Outside
up
of Boston.
30 miles south of Boston.
But park
The car.
the car and have it yard. Yeah. So anyway, so I mean, like, I always thought it was so cool that my parents were park rangers. And so when you retired, you retired, moved out to Brooklyn because mom got a job out there. And then you guys moved to Texas, and now you're back in our hometown, Alton. Definitely, in retirement has not been a chill season for you.
Well, everyone thinks that when you retire, you're going to have nothing to do, sit around and watch TV and make puzzles and mow the lawn, I guess. But I tell people that you got to get a calendar and you need to start writing things down because you get so involved in all sorts of stuff. So all you retired people out there probably know what I mean. You just can't let commitments and interrupt your retirement schedule.
Yeah.
So yes.
I know, like, when you guys were out in Brooklyn, because you were living on a army fort, but you were like volunteering and like helping do stuff at the USO.
I volunteered at the USO.
So it was like you were retired, but you're like your schedule was full.
And walking dogs.
And walking dogs, yeah. And now back in Alton, you're basically a caretaker for grandma and grandpa.
Caretaker.
So,
I still work at the Alton Lock and Dam one day
yeah.
a week.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
So all that to say, I always thought that it was so cool that you were a park ranger, and I never really knew like any of your stories. Like, I knew the occasional ones, but I think what got me was it back in 2017, we took a trip, you and I, out to Acadia National Park, and that was something I always wanted to do. Like, I always wanted to do like a couple days camping in a national park with you. So we went to Acadia, and I remember like one night we were in our campground, and just like you were telling me different stories. Which, by the way, can you please tell in a minute? I want you to tell the story that you told me.
You better remind me which one it was.
I will. But like you were telling all these stories from your different like times at the parks, and it was like stuff that I never knew of, and like because you literally were at the Arch my entire life until you retired.
I really was. When Mom and I had just transferred from the Arch to Colonial, Jamestown Island, and that was Memorial Day, and then I came back to Alton in early September, and Julie and I got married.
Yep.
And then I had already moved out there and found an apartment without her getting to look at it.
A haunted one, by the way.
No, we were in an apartment the first year,
Oh, okay.
An apartment complex, and we moved all her stuff out in her car and my truck, and we were there for 3 years, and yes, then we did move into a house the second year at over in Yorktown, which had a young spirit living in the house, and did a few little tricky things with us, but he never scared us or haunted us or anything like
Just
that.
moved
He
furniture
just moved
and
furniture, and our little pup refused to go upstairs. She just would sit at the bottom of the staircase, and every now and then she would look up, and we could tell that it was moving around, and she could sense it. But
Yeah.
she did not like going up. We took her up once, and she came right down and never went back up.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But then you guys moved back home to Alton.
And then we moved back to Alton, in part because we were ready to have children, and
Yeah.
we wanted to be near one of our grandparents, or their grandparents, and New England didn't have as many opportunities, and it had become very expensive to live in Massachusetts. And your dad says, "Don't come back here; it's too expensive." We started looking at other places. We were trying to get around the Midwest,
Yeah.
and the Arch position, the supervisor position, opened up, and we had to think about whether we wanted to go back, because our intent was to go back just for several years, have kids first couple of years, have grandparent influence and helping us, and then we wanted to move back to another national park where we could live in, because
Right.
both of us had lived in national parks. We just thought that'd be a cool way to raise kids.
Right. It'd be pretty dope growing up in Yosemite.
But things got really comfortable back in Illinois, and Mom got a job with, or Julie got a job with the Corps of Engineers, and she moved up pretty well, and she loved that job and was very good at it. And you guys liked the school, and we had relatives and family, and we had a house, and there was really no reason to go. The job at the Arch was pretty productive for me, so we were just comfortable having a regular life where you had a home and family around you.
Yeah.
Until you guys went to college, and then Mom had that shot at going to work for the division office in New York, and I had already had my time, and so we just went.
Yeah. Which I always tell Emma, I was like, that, like when you guys decided to move. So, side note, they moved to Brooklyn. My mom had got an opportunity to take a job that like was kind of like her dream job in a sense. It was a big step up. Be able to live in Brooklyn, which is pretty cool. At the same time, though, you were kind of in the midst of like a big, like, I don't know if it necessarily was like your dream, but it was like a big moment for you, like getting to help redesign the
Well, we
Arch.
were rebuilding the Arch grounds and,
Yeah.
and rebuilding the museum.
Yeah.
The museum had been there for quite a while, and it was decided that it needed a change, and they changed it totally, and we added on to the visitor center, and then the next phase was going to be redoing the courthouse.
Yeah.
And, so yeah.
Yeah, and like that was all that would have all been happening at the same time as like Mom going out to Brooklyn, and you decided to give up what you wanted, like so she could get that. And I always tell them like that's like I don't know, that's one of the biggest things of like sacrifice that I've seen you do. And it's awesome.
Well, the funny thing is that when we told people, usually their immediate reaction, yeah, we're moving to New York City. What? Rick Zeno moving to New York City?
Yeah.
Because I grew up in a town of about 7,000 people. So,
Right.
and we always said, yeah, you live in Boston. Well, we didn't live in Boston. We hardly went to Boston. My grandparents lived in the outer skirts of Boston.
That's like saying we live in St. Louis.
Yeah, and we did.
Right.
So, but obviously people can tell. Even today, we were talking to a volunteer, and I said something. I said parking the car, and the guy goes, "You're from Massachusetts. You're from Boston. Yeah, you're a Red Sox fan. Yeah, ooh." Because he was from New York.
Yeah.
So
anyways, back to what we were originally talking about.
we digest.
We digest.
Yes, digress.
Oh, Ricky. So anyway, we thought it would be cool, Emma and I, like as a Father's Day gift, to get you this subscription story with, because you were already like starting to write some stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
I found out about it because like I don't know, we came home to visit for a weekend, and you needed help with your computer, which is a normal occurrence, and I've got to help you with this one, don't I? At some point or something.
Somehow something got flubbed up.
Yeah. And I was on your computer trying to get stuff worked out, and I saw a document titled "My Story," and being the nosy son that I am, I opened it up and started reading it. I was like, "Oh, I need to read this," because it was a long document, just like you writing stuff down. So I like sent it to myself and like read it later, and so that was the start of like, okay, we need to get him something where he can like have structure to it, and like we can create this. So we started doing Storyworth, and we, when I talked with you about it on Father's Day, basically I thought like the coolest part would be you sharing all your stories as the park ranger, because I think like obviously there's more to you than that, but like that's something so cool that like your grandkids are going to want to know about, that your great grandkids are going to want to know about, and so we came up with like a list of questions, basically like tell me about your time at Perry's Victory, and then I think like for Teddy Roosevelt we have like 3 chapters basically. Tell me about this, tell me about that, tell me about this, and so you got these prompts and you just started writing, and we need to finish it and everything. But in that, I mean, like I think I'm in this like season right now where I really feel like it's important to leave a legacy behind, and so like I've been doing that with like trying to be intentional about taking photos, taking videos of Mia, so that when she's older, she can look back at these and be able to get a glimpse into like what life was like for us at this point. But I think it's the same thing like with what you're doing with writing down these stories. Like you're leaving a legacy behind, so that Mia can know you, Oliver can know you, future grandkids can know you, and future great grandkids can know you. Like,
well, it's a form of oral history, and the
Yeah.
thing is that
which is very big in the National Park Service.
well, it is. That's what we didn't do. We do is preserving history for future generations.
Yeah.
But to go back and look at the 1700s and the 1800s, in a sense, is easy to do because a lot of people kept diaries. There was a lot of written documents.
Yeah.
A lot of that is gone, but there were documents. Today, though, people aren't writing diaries.
Right.
There's a few, but people don't write diaries. What their diary is either their on their email file of 10,000 emails and
I would say more
things
at least for my generation, is more like Instagram.
right now. I'm the old generation. So
Yeah.
Photos is the same way. Most people now keep photos in digital, and they can disappear, come and go. There's no public storage of them, and people in another 100 years won't be able to go back and look at the collection of photos that Ken Burns is working on,
Right.
or people like that. So it is interesting to go through this. If you're thinking about doing it, is you have to go back, and I've struggled a little bit going back with talking to my mom because she's starting to forget things, and
Right.
And there really aren't many people in our family that have done that. I have a cousin
Well,
that's
yeah, you
done
were
pretty good on one.
You were just telling me that like you don't really necessarily know concretely how Nanny and Nano met.
I have the basics, but again, my mom's memory is starting to go, and she can't remember a lot of the little specifics. But
So it's one of those things of like, if we don't tell these stories, if we don't write these stories down, like
Right.
because I think like I told Emma this at one point. I was like, because she asked me something. I remember she asked me how you and Mom met at one point. I was like, honestly, I don't know if I know. Like, I don't know if that story was ever clearly told to us.
Yeah,
Which
right.
I do know it now. Like when she asked me, I was like, I don't know. I do know now.
Mhm.
But like that was the thing. Like I feel like in our family we didn't necessarily like tell a lot of stories about ourselves. So like for me, like as you're doing all these, like I get an email every time you submit a new one, and I like devour it. I read through it. I'm like, oh, I didn't know this. And so it's been cool for me because I'm learning about what it was for you to be a park ranger and all this stuff. But it's also exciting because like this is stuff I never knew, and so for me it's fulfilling, but also knowing that like the grandkids are gonna get to read that, like it's cool. But,
Yeah, and I'm struggling with some things
Yeah.
myself and trying to remember those early years and things. And I do remember some of probably with each job, there were things that were tied to the job or tied to just us living there or my living there.
Yeah.
So it has made me go back and think a little bit.
So what would you say is like the biggest thing you kind of like learned from this process? Like what are the biggest maybe piece of advice, something like that? Like as you've been going through it, like
like I've said to Eric, brother Eric, son Eric.
my brother.
He is fairly new with the Forest Service, although he's worked firefighting since college, but now that he's full time and everything, he should keep track of some of the things that he does.
Yeah, which and I like we talked to him when he was on here about his Instagram account for the lobster. Which, if you didn't see that episode, he's got a Instagram account. My brother's a forest firefighter. He's got 2 young sons. He's got an Instagram account with a lobster that was his son Oliver's, and Oliver gave him, and he takes it with him on every fire, takes a picture of the lobster in different locations, and then posts it on Instagram, sends it home. And so it's kind of like a Instagram diary almost.
It goes back to the Flat Stanley thing.
Exactly. And it shares with Oliver and Benji like where Dad is, what's he doing. So like even that like will kind of become like a legacy for them.
Yeah, that will be really interesting to follow through. And assuming he goes 30 years or so with the government and firefighting, that to be able to look back at how his career progressed through his lobster shots.
Yeah.
So, but I think that's one thing. I mean, looking at now, you hear stories, but you can't remember stories. I wish I had talked more with my dad.
Yeah.
I wish I had talked more with his cousin Freddie, who did a lot of research on the Xenos. right now I'm resorting to um, the fact that you just knowing when my grandfather or my great grandfather came to this country, and that'll take us the late 1800s, early 1900s. To go back further is it gets complicated. And
Right.
now you're talking about having to dig through records,
Right.
which are out there, but you got to find them and who has them. So my goal is for you will be to try to identify my grandfather and then his brothers when they came here.
Because that's stuff I don't know about. Like,
Yeah, and
like I know that Frank Zeno came from Boston, or came from Italy, which I don't remember the town. I know it's Sicily, but I don't remember the town.
one of the islands around Sicily.
Yeah. Don't know necessarily like what happened when he got here, but he had a market that was then passed to Nano, and that's basically all I know.
Yeah, and so I've gotten that pretty much through a couple of cousins, and my uncle, my dad's brother.
Yeah.
And we'll get that down, and then we'll have a little bit of, our side of, my mom's side, who lived on a farm. She had 11 brothers and sisters.
Yep. Wait, no. Did she have was there 11 in the family, or was
there were 12?
Oh, okay.
She had 11 brothers and sisters.
I thought it was 11 total.
She was actually the youngest girl. And
Yeah.
the twins were the youngest boys.
Yeah.
So we'll get that down, and then you'll have to talk to your mother about getting her side of the story.
Because I think that's just something like I think back to ancient Israel, for example. Like, everyone knew their ancestors, partially because I think the oral tradition, was that was all they had. But we don't know that nowadays. I think we're in a time in history where we just don't know our generations that came before us, which I think is why people are so into ancestry.com and doing all these DNA tests to figure out where you came from, because we just don't know. We've let that slide. So I think this, at least for our family, is a little bit of a way to kind of refocus ourselves and figure out okay, how do we learn about the generations that came before us, but also make sure that we are telling the stories of our current generations.
Yeah. We'll get it taken care of.
Yeah.
We've got a couple months to actually review it and go through it. I have almost all the chapters that I think I'll do done.
Yeah.
The last one here at the Arch, just 20
you got
plus
20
years at the
years,
Arch.
yeah.
So there are a
getting
lot
that,
of different components that happened there that I did.
Yeah.
We'll just have to narrow some of that down, and we'll go from there and then figure out some photos.
Yeah.
I think we got some good photos.
Yeah. There's some fun ones. I like the ones of you in the Smokey the Bear costume.
Smokey the Bear costume. Very embarrassing story to that one. But
Oh, please.
I'm not going to tell. You have to just read it. It's embarrassing. It was to me, although the kids probably got a laugh out. I probably scared some kids, but none of it was intentional.
Now you're just leaving that hanging.
Well, there you go. You're just going to have to read that book.
So, what else would you say about preserving your family history? What else have you kind of been learning through this process, or what else has been something that you're this is important?
Well, it just makes you go back and think about things, and it depends on how detailed you want to be or how specific. And I guess I'm trying to think about what you might ask about, because I really don't remember, like you say, we talked a lot about the early years.
Yeah.
Of course, on Mom's side, almost everybody lived in Bridgewater. A couple did not. A couple of her sisters and brothers did not. So we saw everybody a lot. So there's all that kind of stuff. But you guys, as you guys have grown up with your own families, you're all living all over.
Right.
And so if you're living with your family in the same town or whatever, you see them every week, the story comes out, you hear stuff, and then
right, and you just don't even think about it.
Right.
And I think that was the thing for us. And you kind of even mentioned this in the podcast where Josiah asked you questions like that you felt like you didn't. This is a little bit of a tangent, but you felt like you didn't like necessarily teach us a lot about handiwork or whatever. And I told Josiah, like, I think for you, a lot of the stuff was just like something we call unconscious competency. So basically, like, you know how to do it. You just didn't like explain what you were doing. You kind of like we had to learn by watching. I think that's the same.
I don't know if I was doing it right personally, just from what I picked up and all.
But that's the thing, like I've been doing like housework as we're getting ready for Milo, and it was like, how do you know how to do that? I was like, I don't know. I just watched my dad do it. Like, and she's like, well, how do you? I'm like, I don't know how to explain it. I could do it because I watch it. But like, I think that's the same with like telling our stories. Like, it was just kind of like an unconscious competency. Like yeah, like I would assume you know it.
Well, I certainly will not be writing it in the style of Stephen King or any of those great authors. I mean,
right.
I mean, I'm just writing it.
Well, I kind of like
as
it
I sort of just talk it out. If I was talking to you, we were just going through it. So it might not be. I don't know how interesting it'll be.
It'll be one of those things that'll be interesting to like our family, but it probably would never be like a bestseller. You know, which is totally fine.
Right, and it may not be that interesting to a lot of people. But
I don't know. I love it personally.
But I'm trying to identify, give you the full size, and we can figure that out.
Yeah.
So, but what else? What did I learn from it? I just learned, there's a lot of stories. I've lived in a lot of places and worked at some historic sites that are not big name sites, and but it goes to show that there's a lot of history. There's a lot of interesting people out there that you don't know about.
Yeah. And
they do a lot of things, or did a lot of things that have an impact. So, I mean, it comes down to each person. I mean, you don't really realize how much impact you've had sometimes. And when you sit back and look at it, then maybe you might. But, people do stuff just because they do it.
Yeah.
Just like we were talking in the car today.
Yeah.
Andrew Carnegie donated, I don't know how many millions of dollars, and he created, what did we say, 1,600 libraries, to build 1,600 libraries in this country. Little towns that didn't have a library, couldn't afford a library, and it wasn't a very big building, but it gave them a library.
Right.
So, I mean, there are some people
didn't necessarily do it for recognition.
Right. Was that on top of his list of accomplishments? Probably not. Making all those millions was probably
right.
Big thing. But you know what? He probably got a lot of satisfaction out of doing that and knowing that. Yeah.
And well, let me hang on. I'm gonna reset this camera. Okay.
Is this like a commercial break?
Commercial break brought to you by. Just kidding. We're not brought to you by anything because we don't have a sponsor. Sponsor us. You mentioned in the car the other day. We can kind of close it out on this. That like it's also been beneficial for you because like it's caused you like as you're writing these stories down, like you're remembering things.
Yeah. There's probably things, and I can't remember what the one example we talked about was that I hadn't really thought about. I mean, and one of them was how did mom and dad meet? And I did hear, I think that several years ago, the story, and did I write it down? No. Did it stick in my brain? Not all of it. And now my sister and I are trying to piece it together again, and the one main person you would think would know all the answers is having a hard time with that.
Yeah.
And the only other person might be Uncle Buzz, and I don't get to see him very often, and his memory's going a little bit too. So, I guess the word of the day is that if you're really thinking that this is something you'd like to do, or you need to do, start picking brains now before all your resources are gone.
Yeah.
The live oral resources are gone.
Yeah. Like that was one thing that I, as Grandma and Grandpa get closer to the end, like every time we've gone down there, I'm like, I just want to put a camera in front of them and have them tell their story, and it's getting to the point where it's probably not going to happen.
Right.
But like that's one of those things where it's like, man, I wish we.
And and I think we mentioned this too because my cousin David pointed this out. He's doing a lot of family history on his side, and he found that there's a book out there, a company out there that has a book, what my grandmother could tell us, or my grandfather, or my mother, or my father, and they have different angles to it. But basically, it's like
gives you prompts and you fill
prompts,
it in.
right? What was your favorite Christmas memory? What was your favorite first day at school memory, if you can remember that far back?
Which is kind of what Storyworth is.
Sort of what it is, right?
But we change all the questions.
Less prompting. We create the prompts. But if you don't know what it is, I mean, you could do a question a day, and this one that my brother got my mom. It's favorite teacher at school, your favorite holiday. I mean, everything. And it's just ask for a couple of lines, and by the time you finish that book, you should have an idea of what that person remembered. And of course, if you're talking about somebody who's 70, 80 years old, I mean, that amount of time that's happened between then and now is, you might ask them what do you think was the most important invention in your life?
Yeah.
And I remember at the museum we'd ask that question because of the sod house life, and people said electricity, or light, having light.
Right.
Today most people would say probably what's the biggest thing is, I don't even know if they'd say telephone, the cell phone or computer, because it's just so ingrained.
Yeah.
I mean, people in their teens have no clue what a phone on a wall or a 20-foot cord so you could get out of the kitchen, and a party line and all that is. They have no clue what that kind of a communication system is.
I played the dial-up connection noise for Emma. Granted, Emma and I are only 4 years apart, and I played that noise for her, and she had no idea what it was. She's like, "What is that?"
Yeah,
so,
it's interesting. So, music is different. TV is different. I mean, can you imagine? I remember growing up with black and white TV, and you didn't have to worry about losing the remote because you only had 4 channels, and if you wanted to,
you were the remote.
You were the remote for your dad, right? That's always the joke, Go over there and change it to channel 4, So, I mean, to interview somebody and get somebody's story from 80 years ago would be pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So if you want to do it, you better do it quick.
Right. Yeah. So, all right. Well, let's close it out with tell the story about Perry's victory and giving the tour and the woman who asked about nails.
Oh, that wasn't Perry. That was Vic.
Oh, that was
Valley
Forge. Yeah.
I think more about that scenario, and I hate to. I won't tell any names, but basically, I worked at Perry's Victory, Valley Forge, the winter of '80, I guess it was, and in the year of 1975, this country's bicentennial.
76?
75, 76, that time period, yeah. The state of Pennsylvania sold, if I understand correctly, one of its prime historic state parks to the National Park Service and Valley Forge. And it had been a state park for probably close to 100 years, 85 years.
Yeah.
And they offered the employees there the opportunity to stay on as become federal employees or leave. And some did leave because they just couldn't stand the state sold them.
Right.
And some did stay because they truly were the historian that knew every little bit about, Washington's encampment at Valley Forge and all that. And some of them were true reenactors, probably felt that they were born in the wrong century. They should have been born back then. So anyways, one of the places that I worked was at Washington's headquarters, which was the building that he rented from a family. And it was a small little building, and wooden inside, stone walls on the outside. And I was with this guy that, he stuck with the park, but he wasn't always happy with the federal government. Bus tour came in, these ladies came in, and they're looking around, and they asked them, they had nails back then? And he said, straight face, nope. They taped Christ to the cross. And the lady was like, and I was like, and so I was just a seasonal, but I knew that wasn't the right answer. And I sort of turned and went down the hall, and the lady didn't ask any other questions. They just sort of walked down the hall, went outside, and looked at me when they left the building, and I was like, So, but there are some people who get so tied up into it that any question is not a serious question. They just think it's a stupid question, or they don't give it any credence. I think that helped me because I remembered that.
Yeah.
And, it was a question that these people just probably had never seen a structure like that. I don't know what she was thinking of. But people come, from different ways of life, and they're into a new environment, and they have a question that may come out differently. And I always tried to get my coworkers, my new rangers, to understand that it may seem like a question, or you may hear that question 10 times in a day, but you need to respond to it like it's the first time.
Yeah.
It was a serious question, and explain to them what it was without embarrassing them. So, sort of like kids sometimes.
Yeah. But that's still my favorite story.
But, yeah, I think I've thought about it as I wrote that, and I was like, so I won't identify who the person was.
Probably a good call. Not that any one of us would ever know who it is, but
No.
still.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is it. Thank you guys for watching. Like and subscribe. If you enjoyed it, share it with someone. Yeah.
Good time down here in the Smokies, but don't come over the 4th of July.
Oh, for real. You sure you don't want to tell the story?
Which story?
Your Smokey the Bear embarrassing story?
No, I'm not going to tell that one.
All right, fine. All right, bye.
Bye.